Hello, it's Pastor Tony Denbach here, and this is session one and part one of the premarital counseling program that we're doing. And I wanted to touch base today on the subject of communication. Communication is probably the one of the biggest issues in marriages and in relationships in general. And so that's a great place for us to start. It's one of the reasons that some marriages fail, actually, is because of a lack of communication. It's interesting that almost everyone that I talk to, and I've been doing this for over 35 years now, almost everyone I talk to feels like they are really good at communicating. And what they usually mean by that is they talk a lot. Um, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a good communicator. And so I know that no matter whether you are a poor communicator or a really good one, you can always look to improve. And I think that's always something we should strive for. So as we begin this course, I think it's a great place for us to start. So let's first talk about what communication looks like. Um, some people have said that the communication is simply just learning how to sit down and take the time with each other, and that's a part of it. But I think a good definition of communication is this: it's a meeting of meanings. And what that means is that when what I am trying to say is what you understand me saying, that is communication, and vice versa. So the reason that communication is difficult is that even just verbal communication has 6 steps in it. And I want to talk quickly about that just so that you get a picture of what this looks like. So, for example, I would form a thought in my mind. And in my mind, it's very clear what I'm trying to express. But then I filter that thought through my vocabulary. And my vocabulary is different from your vocabulary. Then I say what I'm trying to say, and I may not talk right. I might mumble. I might sound like I got rocks in my mouth. And sometimes we don't really hear the person accurately. And then what happens is we hear what we think the other person has just said. Then we filter that through our own vocabulary. Then we assign it a meaning. And so there are 6 distinct steps in just verbal communication. So it is very easy for us to miscommunicate on those kinds of things. And so what we want to talk about is how we can be better communicators, not just verbally, but also non-verbally, and how we can ask the right questions, how we can ask clarifying questions to be able to make sure that when we're talking with our fiance, with our spouse, with the important people in our lives, that we are actually hearing what they're saying. One of the main principles for us to understand in communication is this: it's something called goodwill. Most people don't know what it means to have goodwill, but I want to talk about this for a moment. Goodwill is very simply this: it's the understanding that the person that we're talking to, in this case our spouse or our fiance, loves us and wants the best for us. When we believe that, it makes a difference in how we approach, in how we receive, in how we talk, in how we listen. And I found that in many relationships, when it comes time for them to come and talk to me, for example, and they usually want to do that after they're married when things are not going well, the challenge for them is this: they've lost goodwill. And we lose goodwill, for example, when trust has been broken, when someone has been lying or being deceptive, when someone has been hurt or hurt repeatedly, when there's a pattern of behavior that we go, wait a minute, it makes us question the person's goodwill. That needs to be restored if there's going to be good communication. And that takes working through, and it can be done. It is done often. It has been done in my marriage over the years. There have been times when we've kind of looked at each other and went, do you really care about me? Do you really love me? That's just the way that all marriages are over a long period of time. And so the working through of those conflicts is a large part of what relationship is about and what communication is about. So we're gonna talk about that today, and trying to understand that we have a responsibility as people in a relationship to do our best to be good communicators. Now, there's lots of things that go into a communication, and I want to talk a little bit about that as well. If you were sitting across from me, what I would do is I would begin to ask you some questions about your family of origin, about where you've come from, about your background, and those kinds of things, because all of that goes into who we are and the lens through which we view the world. And so I want to talk about that for a moment. For example, your birth order. Are you the oldest? Are you in the middle somewhere? Are you the youngest? Are you an only child? All of those issues, all of those questions make a difference. So, for example, if you're an older child, you tend to be in charge. You tend to like to be in charge. You have been looked at probably most of your life as the person who needs to get things done because you've probably taken care of your younger siblings in some way. You may have been the babysitter. And so, in a lot of situations, you would tend to want to lead just because you've been doing that a lot of your life. If you are the younger child, conversely, a lot of times you may be one who would tend to be glad to have somebody take care of you, watch out for you, and make some decisions for you. If you're a middle child, generally speaking, you're good at just trying to get along because you've learned how to keep your elder siblings from being angry with you, but you've also had to kind of be the bridge between them and your younger siblings. So it's interesting the dynamics that form because of our birth order. And then there is our family background in general. And for example, what kind of a home did you come from? Was your home happy? Was it a functional home or a dysfunctional home? Did your parents get along? Did they argue in front of you? Did they fight a lot? Was it a peaceful home or was it a home that was full of conflict? Did your parents stay together? Those are all really important questions, and the answer to those questions helps to indicate how you were formed, how you were shaped, what made you the person that you are today. So what we're going to do is I'm going to invite you to pause the video for a moment, or maybe for a few moments, and just take the time to talk about your family background. Maybe if you don't know all these questions or the answers to these questions, there may be some things that you don't know. You're about to get married. It's the most intimate relationship there is. And so these are some of the things that you need to talk through. What impact did your parents have on you? What are the lessons that you learned from them, good and bad? What is your relationship like with your parents, and how does that impact you today? What about your siblings, your birth order? So I'm going to invite you just to take a few moments and have that conversation with one another for right now. And we'll all pause, and you can pause this video and ask those questions of one another and have a little conversation, and we'll get right back at it. The next thing that I want to talk about is the traumatic events in our life that shape us. All of us have important things happen in our lives that make us who we are. And so the way that I like to describe it is this, that it seems like a lot of times for us, we start off and life is good, and we have these early childhood days when it's like we're riding in a car and the weather is beautiful and we're looking out the windshield and it's a beautiful sunny day. But then a gravel truck pulls out in front of us, and a piece of maybe a larger piece of gravel or a smaller rock bounces off the truck, bounces up and hits the windshield. It just kind of crackles it all the way across. And we're still driving down the highway, still a beautiful day. But what we see is now different. Now we see through this crackled windshield, and we don't see the same things. Things are distorted. Well, that's what happens in a lot of our lives. Some things happen to us, and for some people, it's incredibly traumatic events. It may be something like a death of someone important to you. Perhaps it's a mother or a father or a sibling. Perhaps it may be abuse of some kind, whether it's sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse. Any of those things can change who we are and how we think about the world. It can be any number of things that have happened to us. It might have been an accident that we were involved in. Things that form fears in us that weren't there before, and they may not even be rational, but they are a part of who we are because of what we've experienced. And so here's another opportunity for you to maybe talk about these things. And can I tell you, you may not feel comfortable talking about these things. These are some things that you may want to keep private. But can I ask you that you might want to consider opening this up to your future spouse? This is the person you're going to be spending the rest of your life with. There should not be any secrets. And so what I would advise you to do is have an open and honest discussion about the things that have made you who you are, because it will help explain some things for you. Okay, so I invite you just to pause this again, take a couple of moments, and talk about those things, those major events in your life that have shaped you, good and bad, that have made you who you are today. Just take a few moments now, if you would. Now, here's one thing that I want to talk about as coming out of those previous questions we've asked, is that how do we change that? How do we deal with those issues in our life, those important things in our life that have um, happened to us, that have made us who we are, the traumatic things in our life? Because here's one thing that I want you to understand. We can't change what has happened to us, but we can give it a different meaning. We can find healing for the hurts in our life. And what I would recommend for you who have been hurt and are still dealing perhaps with some difficult baggage that you're carrying from your past, I would invite you to take the time to talk to someone about that, whether it's myself. I'm not a counselor, but I'd be glad to point you in the right direction, or some qualified counselor who can help you unpack and repackage those events in a more meaningful way. And let me explain that. There was a man by the name of Dr. Richard Dobbins, and he tells the story of his own life. He was born, when he was born, his mother died giving birth to him. And that shaped him, obviously. It shaped a lot of the feelings about himself. On top of that, he looked like his mother, and his father raised him, and his father resented him a great deal and largely blamed him for his mother's death. In fact, he would tell him that. He would say, "You killed your mother. I wish that she had survived and you hadn't." Things like that, which would obviously have a huge impact on a little child. And so he found himself believing things about himself that weren't true because he was told them over and over again. He believed that he was no good, that he didn't deserve to live, and that he would never amount to anything, those kinds of things. And obviously, when you send yourself those negative messages over a long period of time, you begin to live them out. And so he began to be a real troubled child in school. He got in trouble everywhere he went. And eventually, at the age of 16, he ended up getting kicked out of school, getting suspended for fighting and all those kinds of things that you've probably seen other people do. And he had one person in his life, though, who really cared about him, really loved him, one adult in his life, and this was his aunt. And his aunt came on his 16th birthday and kind of rescued him from home and took him out for a day to celebrate. And they ended up at the cemetery. And they ended up standing over top of his mother's graveside. And he looked down at the gravestone, and of course he read the death date, which was also his birth date. And it was once again a reminder. And that message came to him again. Look, you killed your mother. And that feeling came over him again. But it was almost like at that moment he said that God just kind of thumped him on the heart and said to him, wait a minute. Your mother gave her life for you. Don't waste it. And it took him back. It made him stop, and it made him think. And he went, wait a minute. I've been looking at this all wrong. My mother did love me and gave her life for me. And I am wasting it. And something turned in him. Something turned in his spirit. He went back to school. He got straight A's. He felt a call into ministry. Became a pastor. And then he decided that he wanted to help other people who were dealing with the similar things that he had dealt with as a youth. And so he actually went back to school and he became a psychiatrist. And he started this ministry to help people to understand this. And so this wonderful principle is something that I think is very important for all of us to understand. You cannot change what has happened to you, but you can give it a different meaning. And so I want to encourage you, if you're dealing with something very difficult in your past, in your life, deal with it. Deal with it now. Here's what happens when you don't, okay? It's like we want to build a beautiful home, a beautiful family, and all of these things. But we're trying to build all of those things on a toxic waste dump of hurt. And that's a good description of it, I think. And you can build a beautiful home on a toxic waste dump, and it can look good from the outside. But eventually, what ends up happening over time is that toxic waste begins to seep up through cracks and through holes, and eventually it poisons that home and makes it unlivable. And so it may not happen right away. There's always a honeymoon period, and there are good times to be had, and when we can push those bad thoughts aside and we can put our best foot forward and all of those things. But eventually, if we don't deal with our baggage has the potential to destroy that most precious of relationships, which is the marriage relationship. So I want to encourage you to deal with the junk in your life. Okay, so that was just a little encouragement for you to move forward. And I apologize to some of you who may be thinking, well, this is going to be a lot more difficult than I thought. It is, but it's important. Okay, so I would encourage you to take those steps that you need to take to fix this in your life. Now, I also want to talk about something that is called the Johari window. And if you can picture a square that is then divided up into 4 squares. So just a box with a line vertically straight up and down in the middle and a line horizontally straight across in the middle, which creates 4 equal boxes. Now, in that box, what psychiatrists will describe is that there are 4 different parts of us. Now, the first part is the part that is really obvious to everyone. It's the person who is out there that everyone sees. And so, for example, that's the arena, if you like, the public arena, the public face. This is what everyone knows you to be. So if someone were to describe you, this is how they would describe you, whether that is outgoing, whether that's shy, whatever you put out there, okay? That's the first part of you, the open part of you. And beneath that, that's in the top left corner, if you like. In the lower left corner, we have that part of us that is hidden, that is known to ourselves, but not to others. It's the part that we would conceal, that we would keep to ourselves, that we would go, yeah, I don't think I want to let people see that part of me. I would rather keep that to myself. And that's okay, because not everybody needs to know everything about you. But on the top right side, we have that, what we call the blind spots. That's the blind box. In other words, that's the part of us that is not known to ourselves, but it is known to others. And so, in other words, it's the person who goes out to karaoke because they think they can sing, but everyone around them knows that they cannot, okay? And it's actually kind of humorous unless it's us. There are things about us that maybe we don't see, maybe we don't even notice about ourselves. By the way, when you're married, this is the part of you that your spouse will help you with. Learn to receive that gracefully, okay, when they try to help you with that. And be gentle with one another when you see something that is a blind spot for your spouse, for example. Then there's the 4th quadrant, which is the lower corner. And the lower corner is that person, that part of us that is unknown. It's unknown to ourselves and it's unknown to others. Nobody knows this about us. And sometimes we do things and we're going, where did that come from? Why did I do that? And this is the part of us that really only God knows. There are things, for example, that may have happened to you in your early childhood. You don't even know, you don't even remember them, but they've made you who you are. And this is a part of us that, to be honest, we really need to bring to God and go, God, help me to be the person that you made me to be. God understands our frame, the Bible tells us. He knows who we are. He knows who he made us to be. He knows our dreams, our aspirations. He knows our gifts, our talents and abilities. He knows the you that you were created to be, and he can help you become that. And so the reason that I point this out, this Johari window, if you want, is that when we get married, the goal for us is to make that part, of the top left corner, the open part, the part that is known to us and others around us, as large as possible within that marriage relationship. marriage is about knowing and being known, okay, by your spouse. It's interesting that when the Bible described marriage, it talked about Adam and Eve, and it talked about the sexual relationship, and it talked about how that Adam went to his wife and knew her. Talks about that, was talking about sex, and it's interesting that they use that term, that word, know her, because there's an intimacy there, that there's a vulnerability that is created in that moment, and it's something that is special, that is designed to be reserved for marriage. This is the person that you are going to marry, that you're going to spend the rest of your life with, that you're going to be intimate with, and not just intimate physically, but intimate spiritually, intimate emotionally, in all of those ways. And a healthy marriage allows for that to happen. In fact, creates opportunities for that to happen. So I want to encourage you in that to work that through. Now, this is part one of session one. So what I'm going to do is we're going to end this session here. And I encourage you to have a few conversations based on what we've talked about today. And we'll pick this up next time. Okay? Thanks for listening.